1. Introduction. RAWSEP view: the United States government was on track in the Biden administration to reduce the prices for both clean energy heat pumps and clean energy electric cars. Trump tariffs are expected to upset those plans to prevent future air pollution and prevent climate change. The United States government should, instead of certifying wood stoves as safe when they are not safe, go forward with regulations that ban wood stove use and direct government money for use of forest refuse only. For home building and furniture building, for just a few examples of use of forest products for non-burning uses, it is well known from scientific and medical research that wood burning is a substantial source of PM 2.5 emissions, yet the wood burning industry uses the scientifically debunked theory named carbon neutrality of wood burning to argue that wood burning replacing coal burning in industry, and in a trickle-down argument that wood burning should continue for home heating should continue. Presumably because it is called renewable, wood may be renewable in the sense that a tree can be planted in the place of a cut-down burned tree, but it takes centuries or decades for the newly planted tree to attain the stature of the cut-down burned tree. During those centuries or decades, photosynthesis, which converts CO2 to oxygen and so sequesters some carbon, will not take place at the same rate as photosynthesis was performed previously, and wood burning emits both CO2 and PM 2.5, and PM 2.5 is not absorbed by trees, so PM 2.5 is not diminished by planting a tree in the place of a cut-down and burned tree. In fact, a living tree closes its pores against the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning, just as humans hold their breath in the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning. And when a tree closes its pores, the level of photosynthesis that absorbs CO2 pollution goes down. Wood burning emits 90% PM 2.5 particulate matter of 2.5 micrometer size, the perfect size to infiltrate the human lungs, setting off a cascade of human health problems and early deaths. Contrary to many beliefs, wood burning emits 2.8 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel coal burning, and wood burning emits 450 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel natural gas burning. Replacing coal burning with wood burning creates more air pollution in the form of CO2 and PM 2.5 than coal burning. This emission data comes from testing the cleanest burning wood stove in the United Kingdom, the eco-design wood stove, and international convention does not count the emissions from wood burning. The emissions from wood burning are erased from all countries around the world when calculating if each country has met its climate goals. This non-counting or erasure of wood burning emissions data from climate goals does not mean wood burning emissions do not exist. RAWSEP view: purple air PM 2.5 monitors hanging from the eaves of the house of a near neighbor should be used to measure the level of PM 2.5 in the air hyperlocally in the yards of near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners. If PM 2.5 levels exceed World Health Organization standards of 5 micrograms per cubic meter annually, then that evidence of air pollution from wood burning should lead to the shutdown of that indoor residential wood burning appliance, one appliance at a time if necessary. Episode 57 DO February 25th, 2025 Trump upheaval on the third anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine. Upheaval in liberal democracies makes attaining clean air and benefits to human health more difficult. In episode 57 DO 1 and 2 Ukraine, 3 United Kingdom, 4 France, 5 Ukraine, 6 Russia, 7 Taiwan Main Content. 1 Ukraine and Wikipedia February 24th, 2025 was the third anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates of 501c3 nonprofit organization. On February 24th, 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine in a major escalation of the Russo Ukrainian War, which had started in 2014. The invasion, the largest and deadliest conflict in Europe since World War II, has caused hundreds of thousands of military casualties and tens of thousands of Ukrainian civilian casualties. As of 2025, Russian troops occupy about 20% of Ukraine from a population of 41 million. About 8 million Ukrainians had been internally displaced, and more than 82 million had fled the country by April 2023. 2 Ukraine and Substack letters from an American 3 years ago. Today, a massive influx of Russian troops crossed into Ukraine to join the troops that had been there since the 2014 invasion. RAWSEP view of what French President Emmanuel Macron did yesterday on February 24th, 2025. Macron visited Trump at the White House, where Trump broke protocol by not greeting Macron during the visit. The two men took questions from the press. Macron maintained a facade of camaraderie with Trump, but as Trump slumped in his chair and recited the inaccuracies that in the U.S. often go uncorrected, Macron seemed comfortable and in command. He interrupted Trump to contradict him in front of reporters and called out Russia for being the aggressor in the war. A reporter for the BBC noted that there are years when the world goes through some fundamental convulsive change, and 2025 is on track to be one of them. 2025 will be a time when the basic ideas about the way our world works are fed into the shredder. RAWSEP view of what the next German Chancellor Friedrich Merz said yesterday. The far-right German party made gains in the February 23rd, 2025 election, but did not win. Instead, the center-right party won and will form a government with the outgoing center-left party. The incoming party strongly supports Ukraine. I would never have thought that I would have to say something like this, the next Chancellor of Germany Friedrich Merz said yesterday, but it is clear that the Trump government does not care much about the fate of Europe. He said that his absolute priority will be to strengthen Europe as quickly as possible, so that step by step we can really achieve independence from the USA. RAWSEP view of what the European Union did yesterday. The European Union imposed more sanctions on Russia yesterday. RAWSEP view of what the United Kingdom did today on February 25th, 2025. The United Kingdom announced a sweeping package of sanctions rivaling those of the early days of the war of Russian aggression in Ukraine. The UK sanctions on Russia include sanctions against companies in various countries that supply components like tools, electronics, and microprocessors for Russian munitions. The sanctions also include Russian oligarch ships transporting Russian oil, and sanctions on the defense minister of North Korea. RAWSEP view of what else French President Emmanuel Macron has done to rally Europe in support of Ukraine last week in response to Trump weakness. French President Emmanuel Macron, a staunch backer of Ukraine appears to be stepping into the vacuum caused by the loss of the United States after the U.S. reorientation became clear at the Munich Security Conference from February 14 to 16, 2025. Macron invited European leaders to Paris to discuss the U.S. change. On Monday, February 17, 8 European leaders and the heads of North Atlantic Treaty Organization NATO and European Union met on Wednesday. Macron spoke with the leaders of 19 countries, including Canada, either in person or over video. Leaders from Belgium, Bulgaria, Croatia, Cyprus, the Czech Republic, Estonia, Finland, Greece, Iceland, Ireland, Latvia, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Norway, Portugal, Romania, Slovenia, and Sweden also joined the conversation. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates of 501c3 nonprofit organization Heather Cox Richardson. February 25, 2025. At the time of the Russian invasion of Ukraine on February 24, 2022, it seemed that Russian President Putin thought victory would be a matter of days, but Ukraine government officials filmed themselves in Kiev, and Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky refused to leave, rejecting the U.S. offer of evacuation. Zelensky replied, "The fight is here. I need ammunition, not a ride." For the past 3 years, Ukraine has held off Russia. Ukraine's civilian society has volunteered for the war effort, and the defense industry has transformed to produce both hardware and software to hit Russian targets. Now in 2025, Ukraine leads the world in AI-enabled drone technology. The Ukraine army has become the largest in Europe, with 1 million people. Ukraine has suffered attacks on civilians, hospitals, and the energy sector, and at least 46,000 soldiers have died, with another 380,000 wounded. RAWSEP view of Russian weakness. At the same time, the Russian economy is crumbling as its military production takes from the civilian economy, and sanctions prevent other countries from taking up the slack. Inflation is through the roof, and more than 700,000 of those fighting for Russia have been killed or wounded. At the rate it is moving, Russia would need 83 years to capture the remaining 80% of Ukraine. The only way Putin wins now is by persuading the Ukraine allies to be sick of the war, by persuading Trump to cut off Ukraine, and by convincing Europeans that they cannot win either. 3. United Kingdom. UK announces increase in military spending ahead of Trump meeting. Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who is set to meet with Trump on Thursday, said he would increase British spending on defense to 2.5% of GDP by 2027. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates of 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times. February 25, 2025. Britain on Tuesday announced a landmark increase in military spending, seeking to send a powerful signal about burden sharing to Trump before Prime Minister Keir Starmer meets him at the White House on Thursday. Starmer said Britain would raise its military spending to 2.5% of economic output by 2027 and to 3% during the next UK government term, which would mean by 2034 at the latest. Britain, he said, would pay for the massive new expenditure by scaling back spending on overseas development aid. The Labour government had already promised to raise expenditure to 2.5% of gross domestic product from a current level of 2.3%, but it had not given a date by which it would do so. The move would amount to an increase in expenditure of £134 billion, $17 billion a year on defense between now and 2027. Starmer will meet Trump 3 days after President Emmanuel Macron of France, who also sought to project unity between Europe and the United States, but gently resisted him on several points. Macron corrected an assertion from Trump that Europe would be paid back for its aid to Ukraine. Starmer is expected to play host to a meeting of European leaders in London on Sunday to discuss joint plans for the security of Europe following his meeting with the president in Washington that would build on meetings hosted by Macron in Paris last week after Trump announced that he would begin direct talks with President Putin of Russia on a ceasefire in Ukraine. 4. France commentators say Macron's visit to the White House was amicable, but that differences remain. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates of 501c3 nonprofit organization. The Guardian. February 25, 2025. French political commentators reacted with cautious optimism after the Macron meeting with Trump on Monday, which was considered by some as a last chance to ensure a balanced and lasting peace in Ukraine. Gerard Arad, a former French ambassador to the U.S., said the French president had undertaken what he called Mission Impossible, but pointed out that Macron had experience of dealing with a volatile U.S. leader in a way this trip was a last chance. The Europeans are very worried, and he went there to avoid the worst. He is the only one who can do this. Firstly, the Germans had an elections, and the British have left Europe. Arad told BFM TV the worry of Europeans is that Trump will deliver Ukraine hands and feet tied to Russia. There were jokes and smiles. Emmanuel, and dear nods and compliments. Emmanuel is a very special person according to Trump, and he speaks a very beautiful language under the gilded East Room of the White House. The two leaders may repeat that they are on the same wavelength, but the differences are obvious. 4. France and Europe. How can Europe talk to Trump? Flatter than gently resist. Emmanuel Macron, the French president, epitomized how the leaders of Europe are trying to navigate President the Trump increasingly hostile administration. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against wood smoke emission particulates of 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times. February 25, 2025. President Emmanuel Macron of France struck a chummy tone with Trump even as he corrected him with a smile during joint appearances. On Monday, that 1-2 punch of flattery and gentle resistance is an example of how some European leaders are trying to approach Trump. Macron called Trump dear 4 times during a joint news conference on Monday, while emphasizing the shared history between France and the United States. Macron stuck to the script and emphasized shared goals and values, but Macron pushed back when Trump claimed in the Oval Office that Europe would get their money back because of the way they have funded support for Ukraine. Macron interjected in a friendly tone, saying we provided real money. On the surface, Trump and Macron were all broad smiles and handshakes. During the Macron visit, they addressed each other as close friends, reminisced about past meetings, including a Bastille Day gathering in 2017 and the Notre Dame Cathedral reopening last year, and played up a centuries-old Franco-American alliance that stretches from Lafayette to World War II. Macron was careful not to antagonize Trump directly. and put a positive spin on the Trump latest overtures to Putin. Macron was criticized in the early stages of the war for outreach to Putin before taking a harder line. Macron called discussions with Russia useful. Macron even framed U.S.-Ukraine discussions over a mineral deal as a great sign, saying that it was one of the best ways to ensure the United States was committed to Ukrainian sovereignty behind the united calls for peace. Were starkly divergent views on how to obtain it. Trump suggested, "We could end it within weeks if we are smart." Macron repeatedly hammered his own message. Peace cannot mean the capitulation of Ukraine. Macron said Ukraine should not be pushed into a lopsided ceasefire without security guarantees to deter future Russian aggression. Macron repeatedly mentioned the 2014 and 2015 ceasefire agreements known as the Minsk Accords that were forged after Russian-backed separatists attacked and grabbed territory in eastern Ukraine. Those deals failed to prevent 2022 invasion by Russia of Ukraine. It was violated every time by Russia, and we did not react, all of us, Macron said. 5A Ukraine facing the Trump hostility. Ukraine weighs its options, but they are few. There is a broad reckoning in Ukraine. Washington can no longer be relied upon as a supporter, but Kyiv still has agency on the battlefield and can seek increased support from Europe. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against with smoke emission particulates of 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, February 25, 2025. The antagonistic messaging Trump has delivered to Ukraine since taking office has presented leaders in Kyiv with a brutal reckoning that the United States can no longer be counted on as a supporter and may even be an adversary in the effort to end the war with Russia. In the past 2 weeks, Trump has initiated direct peace talks with Russia and dismissed the Ukraine protests that it should have a seat at the negotiating table. He has called the Ukraine president, Volodymyr Zelensky, a dictator and falsely claimed that Ukraine was responsible for the war that Russia started with its 2022 invasion. Ukraine can curry favor with Trump by dangling lucrative economic deals, such as the minerals agreement currently under negotiation, but at the risk of facing onerous terms in return if American support dries up. Kyiv could hold out on the battlefield as long as it can, which could be only a few months, hoping Trump acknowledges that peace talks cannot proceed without its involvement. In the meantime, Ukraine has made an emphatic pivot toward Europe as its new closest partner and potential security guarantor. In the past few days, Zelensky has engaged in numerous calls and meetings with his European counterparts to discuss increased military support, including peacekeeping troops on the ground. On Monday, President Emmanuel Macron of France pleaded the Ukraine case at the White House after Trump returned to office in January. Ukraine hoped to appeal to his business-oriented mindset as leverage. It offered a deal on access to critical minerals, which are key to modern technology manufacturing, in exchange for continued American support. But Trump flipped the concept on its head, demanding a deal worth $500 billion in the Ukraine natural resources, including minerals, oil, and gas, without offering anything in return. Trump has framed access to the Ukraine resources as payback for United States past aid to Kyiv. The real value of American assistance to Ukraine so far is about $120 billion. Kyiv has rejected several versions of a deal that it deems too onerous. A deal will allow Trump to declare that he secured a big financial boon. Another factor is the vanity of Trump, who has boasted that he can quickly end the war, but Trump needs the consent of Ukraine. That gives Kyiv some leverage. Without the Ukraine approval, Trump will not be able to be the great peacemaker he claims to be. Several European countries have already begun financing the Ukraine domestic military industry, and the European Union is debating plans to send Ukraine a significant new support package that could total more than 20 billion euros, about $21 billion. France and Britain have also taken the lead in discussions about deploying European peacekeeping troops to Ukraine as part of a post-war settlement to deter further Russian aggression. Following the discussion by Macron of the idea with Trump on Monday, Prime Minister Keir Starmer of Britain is expected to push the idea during his visit to Washington this week. Still, Starmer has acknowledged that deploying European troops would not be viable without a U.S. backstop to deter Russia in the form of American air cover. Europe failed to meet its promise to deliver 1 million artillery shells by March of last year at a security forum in Kyiv last Friday. The European Union, NATO, and Canada, as well as a retired U.S. general and former CIA director, agreed that the Ukraine path forward must be multi-pronged, deepening ties with Europe, increasing domestic weapons production, and in the immediate term repairing relations with Trump. But officials in Kyiv also do not rule out that Trump could suddenly shift and back Ukraine, especially if negotiations with Russia stall. The Trump flurry of statements in recent days, often delivered late in the day in Ukraine because of the time difference, has been such that a Ukrainian woman said a new joke was now circulating in Kyiv political circles: better to fall asleep early than to listen to Trump on Ukraine. 5B Ukraine reconstruction and recovery will cost $524 billion over the next decade. A report. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against with smoke emission particulates of 501c3 nonprofit organization, The Guardian, February 25, 2025. The cost of reconstruction and recovery in Ukraine after 3 years of the full-scale invasion by Russia will be $524 billion over the next decade, according to a report released by the government of Ukraine, the World Bank Group, the European Commission, and the United Nations. This is approximately 2.8 times the estimated nominal GDP of Ukraine for 2024. The Rapid Damage and Needs Assessment RDNA-4 report adds the RDNA-4, which covers damages incurred over almost 3 years from February 24, 2022 to December 31, 2024, finds that direct damage in Ukraine has now reached $176 billion, which is up from $152 billion in February 2024. 6. A Russia-Kremlin disputes. Trump claimed Russia would accept peacekeeping troops in Ukraine. A spokesperson for Vladimir Putin underlined that any European forces would be unacceptable. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against with smoke emission particulates of 501c3 nonprofit organization, The Guardian, February 25, 2025. The Kremlin on Tuesday appeared to reject the Trump claim that Vladimir Putin was open to European peacekeeping troops in Ukraine. underscoring Moscow's reluctance to align with the Trump efforts to quickly end the war. Trump on Monday asserted that the Ukraine war could end within weeks and claimed that he and Putin supported the presence of European troops on the ground. Yet he will accept that, Trump said, speaking to reporters during a meeting at the White House with the French President Emmanuel Macron. I specifically asked him that question. He has no problem with it, Trump added. But at a press conference on Tuesday, a Putin spokesperson said such a move would be unacceptable to Moscow, fact-checking the Trump claims about the war in Ukraine for now. Putin is likely to keep the dialogue going by picking up the phone. Earlier this month, Trump handed Putin a symbolic victory, breaking the Western unity that had sought to isolate Moscow since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. As talks continue, the U.S. administration has also echoed some Russian narratives suggesting that Ukraine bears responsibility for a war that actually began with the Russian invasion. Moscow remains committed to its military campaign, believing that battlefield gains will only strengthen its position at the negotiating table. While earlier this year there were indications that the Russian advance in eastern Ukraine was slowing, the past week has shown a renewed push by Moscow. Russian forces may have captured nearly 90 square kilometers of territory, their largest weekly gain since December 2024. At the same time, Ukraine is confronting the grim but realistic question of how long it can sustain the fight if Trump decides to cut off U.S. military support. With every town and city captured, the Russian position will only harden. Moscow has time on its side. 60 Russia Kremlin welcomes more balanced U.S. stance on Ukraine after UN vote. Moscow praises Washington for siding with it at UN as European countries abstain in sign of deepening rift with U.S. excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against with smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization, The Guardian, February 25, 2025. The Kremlin has welcomed what it said was a much more balanced U.S. stance on Ukraine after the Trump administration pushed through a UN Security Council resolution on the war that included no criticism of Russia. The Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said the move was evidence of Washington's willingness to try to find a peaceful settlement. Moscow backed the UN resolution, which was passed late on Monday, although European countries abstained in a sign of a deepening rift with Washington. In a simple 3-paragraph motion on the third anniversary of the Russian invasion, the U.S. took a neutral position on the war and called for a swift end to the conflict and lasting peace. It presented a sharply different tone to that of the Biden administration, which had supported Ukraine throughout. The next Chancellor Germany, Friedrich Merz, warned this weekend that Europe should seek greater independence from the U.S. and said an absolute priority will be to strengthen Europe as quickly as possible so that step by step we can really achieve independence from the USA. The U.S. president has quickly moved to direct talks with Putin that have sidelined Ukraine and has sought to strong-arm Kyiv into a critical minerals and rare earths deal to recoup the cost of U.S. war aid. Trump said in a statement on Monday talks are proceeding very well. 100 days of the Trump presidency on April 30th. Look at the Trump presidency on his 100th day in office live at Conway Hall, London, and live streamed globally. Book tickets at Guardian.live. 7 Taiwan watches Trump undercut Ukraine, hoping it will not be next as Trump turns toward Russia. Taiwan grapples with its reliance on U.S. support in the face of conflict with China. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP for brevity and clarity in relationship to residents against with smoke emission particulates. A 501c3 nonprofit organization. The New York Times, February 25, 2025. Soon after Russia invaded Ukraine, the leaders of Taiwan joined the United States and its allies in declaring solidarity with the victim. Taiwan and Ukraine were fellow democracies, each imperiled by its hulking authoritarian neighbor. Now the Trump turn against Ukraine could fan debate in Taiwan about whether Taiwan can count on American support in a widening conflict with China, which claims the self-governed island of Taiwan is Chinese territory. The president of Taiwan announced that Taiwan would increase military spending to at least 3% of its economic output, up from about 2.45% this year. He also said the island, which has more semiconductor fabrication plants or fabs than any other place in the world, would come up with proposals in response to the Trump demand that more such plants be built in the United States, from additional arms purchases and energy imports to semiconductor fabs in the United States. The Xi administration will have to come up with an optimal mix that can catch the attention of Trump.
One introduction. RAWSEP view: the United States government was on track in the Biden administration to reduce the prices for both clean energy heat pumps and clean energy electric cars. Trump tariffs are expected to upset those plans to prevent future air pollution and prevent climate change. The United States government should, instead of certifying wood stoves as safe when they are not safe, go forward with regulations that ban wood stove use and direct government money for use of forest refuse only for home building and furniture building. For just a few examples of use of forest products for non-burning uses, it is well known from scientific and medical research that wood burning is a substantial source of PM 2.5 emissions. Yet the wood burning industry uses the scientifically debunked theory named carbon neutrality of wood burning to argue that wood burning replacing coal burning in industry, and in a trickle-down argument that wood burning should continue for home heating should continue. Presumably because it is called renewable, wood may be renewable in the sense that a tree can be planted in the place of a cut-down burned tree. But it takes centuries or decades for the newly planted tree to attain the stature of the cut-down burned tree. During those centuries or decades, photosynthesis, which converts CO2 to oxygen, and so sequesters some carbon, will not take place at the same rate as photosynthesis was performed previously, and wood burning emits both CO2 and PM 2.5, and PM 2.5 is not absorbed by trees, so PM 2.5 is not diminished by planting a tree in the place of a cut down and burn tree. In fact, a living tree closes its pores against the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning, just as humans hold their breath in the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning. And when a tree closes its pores, the level of photosynthesis that absorbs CO2 pollution goes down. Wood burning emits 90% PM 2.5 particulate matter of 2.5 micrometer size, the perfect size to infiltrate the human lung, setting off a cascade of human health problems and early deaths. Contrary to many beliefs, wood burning emits 2.8 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel coal burning, and wood burning emits 450 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel natural gas burning. Replacing coal burning with wood burning creates more air pollution in the form of CO2 and PM 2.5 than coal burning. This emission data comes from testing the cleanest burning wood stove in the United Kingdom, the Eco Design Wood Stove International. Convention does not count the emissions from wood burning. The emissions from wood burning are erased from all countries around the world when calculating if each country has met its climate goals. This non-counting or erasure of wood burning emissions data from climate goals does not mean wood burning emissions do not exist. RAWSEP view purple air PM 2.5 monitors hanging from the eaves of the house of a near neighbor should be used to measure the level of PM 2.5 in the air hyperlocally in the yards of near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners. If PM 2.5 levels exceed World Health Organization standards of 5 micrograms per cubic meter annually, then that evidence of air pollution from wood burning should lead to the shutdown of that indoor residential wood burning appliance, one appliance at a time if necessary.